It is not a prayer that opens this apostle's mouth in the Bible. It is an insult. He has barely heard the name of the village where Jesus was raised when he fires back a question, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" The line is recorded in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, verse 46. Nathanael, that is what the Gospel of St. John calls this man, but the world looks for him under another name, Saint Bartholomew, apostle, whose feast falls today. And the insult drew no correction whatsoever from the one who heard it. A few minutes go by, and Jesus, seeing him approach, declares in front of everyone, "Here is a true Israelite in whom there is no deceit." We are in Galilee around the year 27. Villages of stone joined by a dirt road, an afternoon without wind, the air tasting of dry dust and trampled scrub. It is there that Philip turns up carrying news, and there that he takes that answer full in the face. No argument. 3 words are enough for him. Come and see. The two of them set out. Apart from that walk, not one other sentence of this man was kept by the New Testament. 3 utterances. That is all that was ever heard from him, and this is the first of them. Leave in the comments the name of the town you are listening from, even if it is a village no outsider could point to on a map. Then run your eyes over the names next to yours. Hamlets, neighborhoods, and capital cities all appear the same size in that list. If there is a request weighing on your heart, add it there. Someone who left to work far away and cannot come back. Someone who has been knocking on doors for months looking for a job. And if the screen in your hand is a phone, repeat Philip's gesture on that road. Instead of arguing, call. He put up no defense of Nazareth. He only said, "Come and see," and walked on beside the other man. Just below, your finger pushes the comment bar to the left, and a button appears with the word hype. One tap is enough to carry this story to someone who has never heard of him. Our tree is going to come into the middle of this video. About it, Jesus reveals to this man something no eye had seen, that he had been sitting underneath it alone before Philip ever arrived. Stay until the tree. Side by side, the two reach the place where Jesus is. Philip brings with him the man who minutes earlier had spoken badly of Nazareth, and the line said on the road did not escape the ears of those standing nearby. No apology is offered. Nobody tells him to be quiet. The first to speak is precisely the man from Nazareth. And what comes out of his mouth is praise, the very line that is read aloud today. This apostles' feast falls on August 24th, and the gospel of the Mass of the day is exactly this scene from verse 45 to verse 51. Anyone sitting in a church pew anywhere the feast is celebrated will hear a priest read out perfectly calmly an insult spoken against the town where Jesus was raised. 4 other times the name Bartholomew surfaces in the New Testament, always wedged into a list of names, never accompanied by a story. The last of them takes place in the upper room, together with the 11 and with Mary, on the eve of Pentecost. Past that line, the Bible never mentions him again. What was left of him is a conversation on a road and a handful of lists where the name appears in the middle. And after that, 2,000 years of stone, of paint, and of leather carrying that same name. Churches bear that name. An island in Rome bears it too, and so does a painted wall half the world has seen in photographs, along with workshops whose owners never read a line about him and took him for their patron anyway. The way to understand why Jesus received an insult and gave back praise begins with the name of the man who spoke it, and as it happens, that name is not really a name. Calling a man by his father's name was the custom of Galilee in the year 30. Since a small village had Simons and Josephs to spare, saying whose son he was became the only way to know which of them the conversation meant. Bar is how you say son in Aramaic, the language those people spoke in the street. Hence the gospel preserving the solemn moment when Jesus, in front of everyone, calls Peter this way: Simon, son of Jonah, Simon bar Jonah. Letter by letter, Bartholomew obeys the same construction, Bartolomai, son of Ptolemy. By the Father's name, that is how the apostle lists of the New Testament record this man, leaving out the name that belonged to him alone. As to who Ptolemy might have been, the New Testament is silent. Nothing of his trade, nothing of where he lived, nothing of how many children he had. What is known comes down to this. One of the 12 men chosen by Jesus entered the history of the world, introduced as that gentleman's son. 3 apostle lists in the Gospels carry him, and in all 3 he occupies precisely the same position. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 10, verse 3, Philip and Bartholomew. In the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 3, verse 18, he comes right after Philip. In the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 6, verse 14, once again, Philip and Bartholomew. 3 different authors, writing in different places and for different audiences, and the 2 names walk glued to each other. In the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, verse 13, the order changes. Thomas comes between them, and there is something stranger still, which almost nobody notices. The Gospel of St. John never says the name Bartholomew, not once in 21 chapters. In exchange, John is the only one who keeps a name the other 3 never say, Nathanael, and the one who brings Nathanael to Jesus is Philip. The Church stitched these 2 ends together and stitched them carefully. Benedict XVI devoted an entire catechesis to this apostle at the general audience of the 4th of October, 2006, and chose his words with a watchmaker's precision. He wrote that Bartholomew is traditionally identified with Nathanael, and that this identification probably comes from the fact that Nathanael appears in the scene of the call exactly in the place Bartholomew occupies in the lists of the other Gospels, beside Philip, traditionally, probably. The Pope did not write is, and he had reason to weigh his words. No text of the New Testament says that the 2 are the same person. And there are scholars who disagree over a detail of grammar. In the lists written in Greek, the father's name usually comes with a Greek ending, and not with the Aramaic bar, which would support Bartholomew being a proper name after all, and not a patronymic. The identification is ancient, it is solid, it is the one the Church uses, and it is not a certainty. It is more honest to say so than to pretend the question is closed. But if he is Nathanael, then we know where he came from. And it is here that the line from the beginning of this video changes flavor. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 21, verse 2, when the disciples go back to fishing after the resurrection, he is introduced with a full address. Nathanael, of Cana in Galilee. Cana is the village of the first miracle, the one of the water turned into wine. It sits high on a hillside a few kilometers from Nazareth. 2 villages of stone in the same fold of hill, each with its terraces of fig and olive trees, each with its handful of houses of mud and roofs of branches, goats tied up in the shade, dust, and the thick silence that exists only in a small place. On clear days you can see one from the other. Listen to the line again, knowing that. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? It is not a religious objection. It is not an argument from the scriptures. It is what a man from the countryside says about his neighbor's countryside. Nazareth was an insignificant village in Galilee, and whoever lived on the hill next door knew that better than anyone. The first line of an apostle in the Bible is neighborhood gossip. The last time his name appears in the Bible, he is not preaching, nor traveling, nor arguing with anyone. He is in a room, silent, praying. Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. The 11 are gathered on the upper floor of a house in Jerusalem, persevering with one accord in prayer, with some women, with Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. Bartholomew is on that list between Thomas and Matthew. And that is the last line. After it, nothing. The New Testament does not say where he went, nor what he preached, nor how long he lived, nor where they buried him. Everything that came afterwards is a trail, a book someone found in the hands of strangers on the other side of the known world, an entire country that says it owes to him the faith it has, and an image Christendom repeated for centuries. But before the silence, there was an afternoon. And we have to go back to it, because it is there that the reason this man has an altar is to be found. Go back to the road on the afternoon the 2 of them arrive. Philip comes in front, with the hurry of someone who has found something and cannot hold in the news. Beside him comes the other, the man from Cana, the one who a moment ago asked, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" He did not apologize along the way. He did not ask them to forget it. He arrived with the line still hanging in the air, and those standing nearby had heard it. Jesus sees him coming from a distance and speaks before he opens his mouth. He says in front of everyone, in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, verse 47, "Here is a true Israelite, in whom there is no deceit. It is not a host's courtesy." In that world, it was one of the highest things that could be said of a man, someone with no fold, no calculation, no second intention, someone in whom what you hear is what exists inside. The man is stunned. He does not understand where that came from and asks the only thing that occurs to him, "How do you know me?" And the answer, in verse 48, has nothing to do with the question. Jesus does not speak of what has just happened on the road. He speaks of before. He speaks of a place. Jesus did not correct the insult. He called it truth. "Before Philip called you, I saw you when you were under the fig tree." And this man who had just spoken badly of his town, he called a true Israelite, in whom there is no deceit. The praise is for the frankness, not in spite of it. In the world of that time, sitting under a fig tree was the image of the place where the law was studied, and Jesus did not say he had seen him in the street. He said he had seen him where nobody saw him. New Testament scholars observe that, in the Jewish culture of that time, the fig tree was tied to the study of the law of God. The rabbinic sources record sages teaching and studying the Torah under fig trees. In the Talmud, dreaming of a fig tree is a sign that the person keeps the law, a reading supported by the book of Proverbs, chapter 27, verse 18. "Whoever tends the fig tree will eat its fruit." Sitting under that tree was the common image of the ideal place for anyone who wants to learn. The Gospel of St. John does not say what that man was doing under the tree. It does not explain, it does not comment, it does not tell. All that is known is what the fig tree meant to those who heard the line that day. And what it meant was this: a place of deep shade in the middle of the afternoon, leaves wide as open hands, still heat, cracked earth, and a man sitting alone on the ground. No house nearby, nobody passing. It is the place you go to precisely so that nobody comes after you. It was there that he was seen, and his reaction is not that of someone impressed by a trick, it is that of someone who has been found. In verse 49, the same man who minutes before despised an entire town says, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. Measure the distance he traveled." Between the mocking question and the confession of faith, there fits a short walk and a single sentence of Jesus. No argument was presented. No miracle was worked in front of him. Nobody proved anything to him. He simply discovered that someone had seen him, and that was enough. Frankness is a double-edged blade. The man who says to your face what he thinks is also the man who admits at once when he is wrong. And Jesus answers with a promise greater than anything that road could hold. In verses 50 and 51, "Because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he adds, "You will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." Those who heard that recognized the quotation at once. It is Jacob's dream, in the book of Genesis, chapter 28, verse 12. A ladder set on the earth with its top touching heaven and angels going up and down on it. Jesus is saying that the ladder is now a person. Benedict XVI, in that same catechesis of 2006, noticed one last layer of the praise. The expression "in whom there is no deceit" echoes a verse of the Psalms, the 32nd verse 2. "Blessed is the man in whose spirit there is no guile." In other words, Jesus did not improvise a compliment. He took a beatitude from his own people's prayer book and laid it on the head of a man who had just spoken badly of his neighbor. And what did he do after that? The oldest report that exists about this apostle outside the Bible is from more than 100 years after that afternoon on the road, and it has a peculiarity that is hard to forget. It does not speak of him. It speaks of a book he is said to have left behind. Eusebius of Caesarea, the first great historian of the Church, writes in the Ecclesiastical History, Book 5, Chapter 10, about a man named Pantaenus. Pantaenus ran the Christian school of Alexandria in Egypt and went to preach far away among people the Greeks called Indians. And he found there something he did not expect. Christians who already had in their hands the Gospel of Saint Matthew, written in Hebrew letters. He asked where that had come from. They answered that Bartholomew, one of the apostles, had preached there and left the writing with them, and that they had kept it ever since. 2 reservations, and both come from the ancient text itself. The first, Eusebius does not assert, he collects the report. The word he uses in Greek means it is said, it is told. It is a second-hand account, and he leaves that in writing. The second, India, in the vocabulary of that time, is not the India of today. The name covered southern Arabia, Ethiopia, the whole coast of the Indian Ocean. Several scholars place those Christians in southern Arabia, but notice what is left, even after discounting everything. The first report history keeps of this apostle is not a sermon, it is not a miracle, it is not a tomb. It is a book in other people's hands, kept by people who did not know him, generations after he had passed through there. He went away and left a text behind him. The other end of the trail lies much further north, in the mountains between Lake Van and Lake Urmia. The Armenian Apostolic Church has 2 apostolic patrons and calls them the first illuminators of the nation, Thaddeus and Bartholomew. Armenia is the first country in the world to adopt Christianity as the religion of the state, around the year 301. In other words, the first Christian nation in history says that the ones who opened the door for it were 2 men the New Testament hardly speaks of. It was there, this tradition says, that he died, but the church has never defined how. The ancient sources disagree among themselves, and they disagree head-on. One version says he was crucified upside down, another says he was flayed, another says simply that he was beheaded. The most remarkable thing is that a medieval collection of lives of the saints, the Golden Legend, written in the 13th century, sets the 3 versions side by side and acknowledges in writing that they contradict one another. Then it proposes a reconciliation to fit them all together. A 13th century author, who had no obligation whatsoever to be rigorous with his readers, chose to show the stitching rather than pretend he knew. And it was one of the 3 versions that crossed the centuries and stayed glued to him, the flaying. Not because anyone proved it, because it was the one that turned into stone, paint and trade, and it is from it that everything this man left in the world after his death is born. Between 1536 and 1541, on a wall in Rome, Michelangelo painted the Last Judgment. It is the back wall of the Sistine Chapel, and it is probably the most looked-at painted surface in the history of Christianity. It is in the schoolbook, on the postcard, in the television documentary, on the phone of everyone who has been there. Millions of people have already looked at it. Imagine the day the scaffolding came down. The wall appears whole for the first time, hundreds of bodies rising and falling in a whirlwind. Saints, angels, the condemned, and Christ at the center with his arm raised. Just below him, a little to the right, a bearded, powerful man is sitting. In one hand he holds a knife. In the other he holds something the eye takes a moment to understand. It is a human skin, limp, empty, hanging by the shoulders with the arms and the legs falling through the air. It is Saint Bartholomew. And among hundreds of faces on that wall, there is one that is not a face. It is the face drawn on that skin, with the mouth turned downward. That face is Michelangelo's. A receding hairline, beard, moustache, deep eye sockets, the mouth twisted downward. The same features as the portrait his disciple, Daniele da Volterra, left of the Master. The greatest painter of the West signed the greatest wall of Christianity, and he did not sign it with his name. He signed it with his own face hanging from a martyr's skin, and he chose this martyr for that. For almost 400 years, nobody had noticed. Generations of cardinals, popes, pilgrims, painters, and art teachers passed beneath that wall without seeing, and the one who saw was not an art historian. He was a doctor. Francesco Lacava was a Calabrian physician, a man from the provinces with no chair and no name in the world of the arts. In May of 1923, he walked into the Sistine Chapel the way any visitor walks in, neck twisted upward. And after that he could not look at anything else. His eye was trained to read anatomy in real bodies, and it was that eye that recognized in the piece of limp skin the structure of a known face. In 1925 he published a book about the discovery with the Zanichelli Press of Bologna. The title is The Find Itself, the face of Michelangelo discovered in the Last Judgment. The reaction was brutal. The art historians of the day contested the thesis with violence, and the reason for the discomfort was not only technical. It was hard to admit that an amateur had seen what the specialists had not. Today, La Cava's reading is accepted by the critics. What Michelangelo meant by that, nobody knows. Scholars argue about it to this day, and several explanations circulate, all of them interpretation. What is beyond dispute is the gesture. And notice what it is, placed beside the story this video has already told. On a wall, the whole world knows there is a face that spent almost 400 years without being seen by anyone, until a man stopped beneath it and saw it. But this apostle's name did not end up only on walls. It ended up on one of the worst days in European history, and a Catholic channel that left that out would not be protecting anyone. In August of 1572, Paris was celebrating. Henry of Navarre, a Protestant, and Margaret of Valois, a Catholic, were married there, a marriage designed to pacify a kingdom cracked by wars of religion. The city was full of Protestant nobles who had come for the wedding. On the 22nd, there was an attempt on the life of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, head of the Protestant party, and a man of growing influence over King Charles IX. Coligny was only wounded. The king promised to investigate. In the early hours of the 24th of August, Saint Bartholomew's Day, the French court ordered the Protestant leaders eliminated. Coligny is among the first killed. What began as a political decision spilled into the streets and then into the provinces and lasted for weeks. Academic estimates speak of 2,000 to 3,000 dead in Paris and of 5,000 to 30,000 in the whole country. The range is wide on purpose. The Protestant accounts of the time inflated the numbers, and the Catholic ones reduced them, and history has still not closed the account. The decision was the French court's, but Rome's reaction came afterwards, and it is that reaction and only that which is attributed to the papacy. Pope Gregory XIII, on receiving the news, ordered a Te Deum of thanksgiving to be sung. He ordered a medal struck with a legend in Latin meaning slaughter of the Huguenots, 1572. And he commissioned from the painter Giorgio Vasari 3 frescoes for the Sala Regia of the Vatican, depicting the episodes of those days. This is documented. The medal exists and the walls are still there. 90 years later, on the other side of the English Channel, the apostle's name attached itself to another rupture. In the England of 1662, a law determined that every minister who did not conform to the official prayer book by Saint Bartholomew's Day should be expelled from the Church of England. About 2,000 ministers left. And the date was chosen with an accountant's coldness. The 24th of August was the day the clergy received the year's income. To leave on that day was to leave without the full pay and without a house. Among those expelled, the day became known as Black Bartholomew's Day, and that is how one arrives at Paris the 23rd of August, 1997, the eve of the date. Before hundreds of thousands of young people gathered at the vigil of World Youth Day in that same city, John Paul II took the subject by its name. He said that on the eve of the 24th of August, one cannot forget the sad massacre of Saint Bartholomew's Day, an event of very obscure causes in the political and religious history of France. And he said the line that remained, "Christians did things the gospel condemns." He added that recognizing the weaknesses of the past is an act of honesty and of courage. He spoke on the eve, exactly like the one who prepared the eve of 1572, and he spoke in the same city. Saint Bartholomew is the patron of tanners, of butchers, of glovemakers, of leather workers, of tailors, and of bookbinders, people with rough hands who have never read a line about him and remember him every day in a workshop. This patronage does not come from the trade he had in life. Nobody knows what he lived on, No source says whether he fished, whether he farmed, whether he traded. The whole patronage comes from the way tradition says he died. Skin is the raw material of all those trades. The tanner and the glovemaker work leather. The butcher flays. The tailor cuts what clothes us. That is how those men adopted him, not because they admired his doctrine, which nobody knew, but because they recognized in the saint the very material they spent the day with. The case of the bookbinder is the most literal of all, and it is medieval. Step into a bookbinding workshop of the Middle Ages. Skins stretched on wooden frames, tied with cords, drying in the shade. The strong smell of lime, which loosens the hair, mixed with the smell of leather. Scrapers leaning against the bench. Because the book of that time was not made of paper, it was made of parchment, that is, of animal skin, flayed, scraped, and stretched until it was thin enough to take ink. Whoever made books spent his life with skin in his hands. And high on the wall of that workshop was nailed the print of the saint those men had chosen. Notice the circle that closes there on its own, and it closes without forcing anything. The apostle who is said to have left a book behind on the other side of the known world is the patron of those who make books out of skin. There is today in the middle of the river that cuts through Rome an island. It is small, it has a bridge on each side, and at the top of it there is a church with this apostle's name. Beneath the high altar, inside an ancient sarcophagus of red stone carved with lions' heads, relics of him are kept. What was left of him changed cities so many times that today 2 Italian cities claim the same body, and the dispute is 1,000 years old. The oldest tradition links him to the island of Lipari, north of Sicily, and tells that the body arrived there inside a sarcophagus thrown into the sea. It is a legend of a miracle, and as legend it must be told, but there is a firm date inside it, and the date belongs to the source, not to the episode. A French bishop writing around 587 was already recording that connection as something everyone knew. From Lipari the relics went on to Benevento in southern Italy in 838, from Benevento to Rome in 983, taken by the Emperor Otto II, and the church on the island was raised over them around the year 1000. Benevento never accepted it. The city goes on claiming possession of the true relics, and the apostle is its patron to this day. And the most honest piece of information comes from the Diocese of Benevento itself, which makes clear, ever since the archbishop who opened the urn with his own hands and later became pope, that what lies there are bones of the saint, and not the whole body. Nobody knows for certain what is beneath which altar. 2 cities pray before the same apostle, and each one says he is with her. In 1999, preparing the Jubilee of the year 2000, John Paul II created a commission to study the lives of Christians killed for the faith in the 20th century. The commission worked for 2 years inside the basilica of that Roman island and gathered around 12,000 dossiers coming from dioceses all over the world. In the year 2000, the Pope dedicated there the memorial of the new martyrs. In March of 2023, the memorial was reorganized in the medieval crypt with 6 altars. Go down there. 6 altars of stone, low light, the smell of damp that every old basement has. And on one of them there is no chalice, no candlestick, no monstrance. There is a rough stone the size of a closed hand. It is the stone with which they killed a Polish priest, Blessed Jerzy Popiełuszko, in 1984. Beside it, on another altar, is the breviary of an 85-year-old French priest, Jacques Hamel, killed at the altar of his own church at the end of morning mass in 2016. The little book was given to the basilica on the 15th of September of that same year. Over the bones of a man about whom almost nothing is known, the church laid the objects of people who died yesterday, and the first reading of today's Mass was already saying that before any crypt existed. It is the book of Revelation, chapter 21, the holy city coming down from heaven with a wall set upon 12 foundation stones, and on each of those stones is written the name of an apostle, not the portrait, not the biography, the name. And this man's name is written on one of those stones, and the whole city rests there. Think now of one thing only, and slowly. This man entered the Bible speaking badly of a place, and Jesus did not pretend he had not spoken. He did not correct him in front of the others. He did not shame him. He did not order him to apologize. He looked at that flaw and called it truth. What place do people say nothing good comes out of? Perhaps it is yours. The small town, the neighborhood nobody talks about, the name that makes people change the subject. It was from a place like that that God chose to come. Who saw you when nobody was looking? Not what you do in front of others, what you do alone, with no audience, with nobody to praise you. That prayer said quietly in the dark, that act of care nobody thanked you for. This apostle's faith was not born of a miracle. It was born of the discovery that he had been seen in a place where he was sure he was alone. If you know someone who walks around ashamed of where they came from, send this story to that person. Perhaps they need to hear today that the first line of an apostle was an insult, and that heaven called it truth. Saint Bartholomew, Apostle, pray for us.